Hello, I'm Chris Solo, and welcome to the Fabled 42, where we build community through friendship, gaming, and chaos. You're watching Quests and Answers, where we take that quest and try to find your answers. And today, I have a very special guest with me, Jason Russell.
Hi, I'm Jason Russell. I known as at Critical Dice on Instagram. You can find all the stuff that I do there, game hooks and dice and all that fun stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason, for coming.
Yeah, of course.
So today's show, we are going to talk about the fighter class, kind of like everything that goes around in the fighter class, ways to play them, best races, and all that. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into today's episode of Quests and Answers. So, Jason, thank you so much for joining me today. I've actually never played a fighter, so I have a notebook ready. I am ready to take some notes. Let's talk about it. So, when choosing a fighter, what's the best direction to go? You know, if you've never played a fighter before, do you just go human and you do like champion, or is there a better direction to go to kind of
Well, I mean, I
yeah.
think when it comes to the fighter, it's just like any other class. You start with the story. You always want to start with the narrative. Like, so who is this person? What are their values? What's their backstory? Where did they come from? Why did they choose to be a fighter? Before you get even to any of the mechanics, because I think that the fighter has this reputation, some of it's earned, of being just like, oh, the most basic of classes, the most simple. And early on, it kind of is. And so it makes a really great class for someone who is new to the game or just wants to you not have to worry about spell slots and things
Yeah.
necessarily. So it's a great place to start, but you always want to start I think again with narrative and the story that goes along with it, and not just like dive straight into the mechanics. But that being said, fighters don't have to be just simple or dumb, big sack of hit points with a sword. They are just as customizable and just as interesting
Yeah.
as any of the other classes, especially if you take it with the mindset of what makes this particular fighter unique. And in my opinion, it could be actually more interesting. You know, there's a comic that I read called Order of the Stick, and it's
Mhm.
stick figure drawings, kind of, that are really really good. And it's basically an adventuring party going through a D&D world that's been running for like a decade or more now.
Wow.
And the second smartest character in that comic is the fighter, their leader. He's got like a score, like a 16 intelligence, and he uses it for strategy and tactics and keeping his just dumpster fire of a party together. And I just love the way he's characterized, and
Yeah.
it kind of gives a lot of inspiration for other fighters and stuff too. But yeah. But to your other point though, like, what race should I do? Do I just go the most simple option? You absolutely can do that because you always can customize later.
Yeah.
But what I like about fighters is that any race will actually work with that class. Fighters really great because of versatility. Half elves and elves are great. If you want to go the strength route, you've got Dragonborn, you've got Goliaths, you got half orcs, would all work really great. But then anything that has a high dexterity, typically like elves
Yeah.
and tieflings and halflings and all those other things, also work really great because you could always be an archer versus a hack and slasher. Or you can still be a hack and slasher, but just go with the finesse weapons. So it really does open up the whole playing field because there's two stats, strength and dexterity, that you could use, and then your secondary being constitution. Unlike some other classes where it's like, well, if you're going to be a cleric, what's going to give you a great, wisdom score? If you're going to be
Yeah.
a sorcerer, how are you going to get a great charisma? But the fighter actually has more options than just that.
All amazing, amazing points. So you had mentioned something, which is the next part of this segment, Ronan segue, is dex based versus strength based fighters.
Yeah.
So going ranged versus just melee. I mean, we saw with like mythical melee, there were
Mm-hmm.
several fighters. Logan was one of them,
Yes.
who was death from above, as I think it was a samurai ranged fighter,
Mm-hmm.
which gets ridiculous. And we'll talk about the attacks and tactics and stuff a little bit later in the segment. But um, personal preference and strengths and weaknesses with either. With the
Well,
yeah.
I think that in D&D 5e in general, dexterity may be a little OP because dexterity helps you so much with very common uh, saving throws like pit traps and fireballs, and also it affects your AC, except
Yeah.
in only very certain circumstances, and it lets you do ranged weapons,
Yeah.
and it lets you do finesse weapons, because a finesse weapon like a short sword or a rapier or a scimitar gives you the option to use either dex or strength, and so
Yeah.
you can still be an up close fighter with some pretty decent weapons, and you can still shoot a bow like nobody's business.
Yeah.
So I think dex it might be, if you're indecisive or you want options, and I'm always a person who wants options. I think I value versatility and flexibility above everything else.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at the characters I've always played, it's kind of obvious if you go back and look at it with that in mind. Then Dex is a great way to go. But strength is really good too, because strength opens up a lot of options for you. And there's some really easy ways to increase your strength with magic items and other things. Whereas Dex, there's not as many things that can just like, take your Dex through the roof.
Yeah.
Gauntlets of Ogre Strength,
The belts.
Bells
Yeah.
of Giant Strength.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things that you can do. With Dex, it's not as much.
Well, yeah, I think that was their attempt in trying to balance the scale
Yeah.
because
I think so.
Yeah. Because
Because-
I agree. Like, I mean, you can get yourself some studded leather armor and some high dex, and you will have a 19 if you don't have
Yeah.
a shield AC.
Yeah.
You can even go higher than that. No, I think 19 is what you get. But that's without any other, special magic items or anything like that. And it is fun because then you use finesse weapons and then up close, and then you use bows from afar. You take sharpshooter and a few other things, and you're like, okay, this is
Oh yeah,
scary.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing is too, is that the fighters get a fighting style. They're one of the, like, I think 2 or 3 classes that get a fighting style. I think Ranger and Paladin get them as well.
Yeah.
And but you could use defense fighting style, which means as long as you're wearing armor, you get a +1 to your AC. So now if you have a max dex, that's +5 plus
Yeah.
the 1 plus the 2 from studded leather, which is like nothing. Then you're already at 18. Now throw a shield in there, and there you go. Now you're at 20, and it's just like ridiculous. So
Or you take dual wielder, and then you get the +1 because you're dual wielding as well, which then
right, which is
Yeah.
a feat.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
if you add that to the fighting style, which lets you use your, your ability score
that's right.
damage.
Yeah,
to the,
there's
to
so
the
many
second
fun
attack.
combinations.
Th-
So many.
There is.
Yeah.
There really is. And then, so fighter can do a lot, but its basic function though of a fighter is you're going to have your main way to attack, and then your main defense is probably going to be your constitution.
Yeah.
And they get the second highest hit die in the whole game,
Yeah.
D10. They get second wind, which lets them kind of do some self-healing on a limited basis.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of meant to be frontline fighters, or to be at least reliable damage dealers, because, wizards and other spellcasters, they run out of spell slots. A fighter can always swing a sword, and
Yeah.
at higher levels, a bunch of times. So it's just, and too, like, I mean, if you're in an anti-magic field or fighting a beholder and it looks at you, it's like, that's fine. I'm still going to, slash you to death. So they're very reliable damage dealers.
Yeah.
And if you're strength based and you even lose your weapon, unarmed attacks, you're still okay-ish,
Yeah.
or just grab a club or a chair or something like it's, WWE wrestling or something. You can always do that. So they're just very,
Yeah.
very steady. They're reliable. And they don't have to, like I said before, they don't have to be dumb. They can actually be strategists, and it makes the most sense for fighters, I think, to be strategists. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because, like, speaking of strategy, and earlier in the segment you were talking about like stereotypes and everything else, and to me, being a military guy,
Yeah.
I, especially with D&D, because D&D is so combat heavy, is like, it blows my mind. I mean, yes, there are dumb soldiers out there, sure, but like, there are a lot of very intelligent ones. Even like the dumb ones are smart in combat. So like, it's
Right, 'cause they
fine.
had training, right?
Yeah, the training, like, that's
they beat
what
it
your
into them.
purpose is. Everyone freaks out when there's a stressful combat situation, but a soldier is calm as a cucumber. He's burning the eggs, and then he freaks out because those are like common mundane things. So it's always flipped with soldiers. But it's interesting because I've watched a lot of streams, and I've played a lot of games, and I've seen a lot of people play fighters and they're just like that, just like barbarians. Everyone always plays them both kind of just like, dumb melee guys, and don't come at it with like, I was a lieutenant in the war and I have all of this knowledge and tacts, and but it's just because it's just people aren't drawn to it, or it's that they fall into the stereotypes. But what are some tricks with picking a fighter, and if you aren't a soldier in real life and you don't have those tactics, what are some tricks to kind of give your fighter those characteristics? Because people who play D&D can be very, very tactful, right? They know the game, they know the mechanics, they kind of play to the mechanics instead of to the story, which is fine, but which works for a fighter because that's how a fighter should think. But what are some tricks for someone new who's playing fighter who wants to try to navigate that?
Yeah, so some of the basic strategies it comes to combat for D&D, they really do help with like everyone, but with fighters especially, because they typically are up front and kind of leading the charge, as it were. It's just kind of a party role trope that they kind of just naturally fall into. One is to understand that because the way of that combat works in D&D 5e is the side that has the most actions typically is going to win, especially at lower levels. And so as a fighter, if you're able to swing your sword twice per attack action, that's great. And then if you're also dual wielding, and that means you have 3 attacks. And then if you use action surge, that's going to be 5 attacks. And if you get boots of haste, or someone casts haste on you, that's even more attacks. And so some of these things you could do just yourself, and some of these things you could do in combination with other people. So as long as you can keep the number of things happening high on your side of the battlefield and keep reducing the things that are happening on the other side, you're probably going to win.
Yeah.
And so that also means, though, is you have to realize as a frontline fighter, or even if you're a reliable damage dealer from the back as an archer, is you have to understand that the amount of damage a foe does at full hit points and at 1 hit point is typically the same. So you need to stack damage. Don't just like kind of hit everybody a little bit for everything. Focus on a person unless there's a good reason not to, and try to get as many of the other players on your team to do the same and stack that damage and eliminate them.
Yeah.
And then move on to the next guy, because then, like I said before, the amount of actions on their side goes lower, and on your side it stays high. Yeah. And so don't spread out the damage. Don't everyone pick their Huckleberry and go for it.
Which people do all the time.
They do, and it drives me crazy because I'm like, you can do that. That's absolutely valid.
Yeah.
However, if you're wondering why you're almost dying every encounter, perhaps this is why. And the game is actually kind of set up that way. And so it's not like you're like hacking something. It's just like if you play chess, like knowing that you can exchange your rook and your king if you haven't moved them, that's not a hack. It's just a move, and there's good reasons to do it in certain situations.
Absolutely.
So know that and use it. And so stacking damage is another one of those things.
It's funny that so many people don't realize that you can do a king or a queen side castle and move your. They don't. I love chess. I didn't know you liked playing chess.
Yeah, I do. I'm not very good, but I do. Point of word. But yeah, so those are some really good things too. And then also know what the other people in your party can do, and find ways to make those things work to your advantage. And so if you can restrict the movement of the enemy, that's going to be really good too. And so if your druid is going to cast entanglement, or what is it, like razor vines or something, so that if they
thorn vines, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, basically where they can't move, or if they do move, they take damage, and then the cleric drops like a burning sphere on top of them as well. So they're screwed if they do. They're screwed if they don't move.
Oh yeah.
And then that means the rest of the party, the ranger, the fighter, and the rogue can sit back 20 feet as a front line and just shoot them with arrows and daggers and javelins. Yeah. It's just like, that's going to be amazing, because they can't respond back typically, especially if they don't have any range attacks of their own. It's things like oozes and undead, a lot of time they don't have that. So
you know what's wild when we talk about D&D and tactics and fighting and all this, and I don't know if you've ever played World of Warcraft or not, but a lot of D&D players play World of Warcraft, and that's how they play it. When you play World of Warcraft, I don't know if it's just the mental visual of seeing the monster with the health bar, and you see all these monsters with health bar, but they always focus on one, they kill it, and they move to the next one. And it's usually
Mm-hmm.
the tank is trying to hold the aggro, which is hold the attention of all the
Right, because
creatures,
they
while
can
all
take
the
it.
ranged
Yeah.
people are just popping it. But then you take those same people and players and you put them in D&D and they play completely differently. But it's like it still should be
Yeah.
the same mindset. But
Yeah, because those visual cues aren't there. I
yeah,
think in fourth edition, it was much more tactical and more minis based and more like a video game like WoW, where
yeah,
those strategies were a little bit more obvious because of the way it looked, I think. And so now with much more role play heavy 5e, which I completely love,
yeah,
it perhaps doesn't, that part of the brain doesn't click over. And then also we have so many new players coming into the hobby with 5e, which is amazing, that they're approaching it from the role play side, and no one has just taught them, hey, here are the strategies that make a combat go well for you, just like the social strategies that make role
yeah.
play go for you well for you. And then also too, like with restricting movement too, like talk to your DM and see like what kind of things do they do, like can two friendly characters pass each other on the same square during combat? So if like there's a big bad standing in a doorway, can his two buddies behind him go through that square, or do they have to wait until he moves through? And then if
Yeah.
they can't, make sure your tank is standing right there and keeping him in that doorway, so now the guys behind him can't do anything.
Correct. Because I mean, I see that all the
Reducing
time
those amount of
where
actions.
they don't have the same rules would apply for both groups. The enemies
Mm-hmm.
coming in or the allies going through. I mean, personally, I think you should allow that because if you've ever watched any battle reenactment movie, like guys, especially when they've fought together, they're like
Yeah.
they slide shoulder to shoulder, armors like rubbing and grabbing and smash into someone else, and then
Mm-hmm.
fluidly come through. Like Spartans, for example, they're always like super tight knit, keeping it
Yeah.
very tight. So like, there's no reason why you couldn't slide through. But again, also, I'm not 5 feet wide, so I understand the mechanics of D&D, but like at least two
Yeah,
people could
you're
fit through a
you're not
doorway.
5 feet wide, but go swing a sword for a minute, and you'll see that
Oh no,
you
you take up space.
take
Yeah,
that space.
yeah,
Yeah, and so it's just they might have to make a hard choice when they do that. Yeah, yeah, they can get through. They might get hit though,
yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a D&D game, a podcast called Caffeine Check, and I consult on that game. And one their least experienced player is playing a fighter, and he's the son of a general, and he was not he just didn't know what he didn't know, and he didn't know how to do some of these strategies. And so he wasn't playing like a tactician that his character would be. And
Yeah.
so he was, because he didn't know these things, he wasn't able to role play to the fullest of what he had made this character to be. And so I
Got it.
kind of took him through a boot camp of how to
Nice.
do this stuff. And he had some like modified boots of speed, which basically gave people disadvantage on
I like it.
opportunity attacks against him, as well as his increased movement and stuff. And I was like, listen, you're dual wielding. You've got the right feet and fighting style. You've got those boots, and you've got your accent surge. And then he was also a battle master, right? So they
Okay.
have all these different maneuvers they can do, and one of them was, I want to say it's riposte, where if they attack you and miss, you can use your reaction to hit again.
Yeah, I think so.
And I was like, okay, so you can go in 2 attacks for the action, bonus attack. You can action surge and then do 2 more. And then you can back away. And if they try to get you and they have disadvantage on the attack because of the boots and they miss, now do riposte. And so you used one limited resource, the action surge, and now you have 6 attacks.
Yeah.
The person in front of you should be dead by that point, and now you're away from the next person to come in. Now they have to come into you, and hopefully into something much more dangerous, like your rogue who's hiding in the corner, right? And so
Yeah.
like we had to kind of walk through some of these things, and it really changed things for him, and it was really great. So
That's amazing. Okay, so we're about at time, but so in 30 seconds, what is your favorite subclass of fighter and why? 30 seconds.
well, I think you know what it is, and that's going to be the Eldritch Knight, because they don't lose anything with combat prowess, but they gain all these really cool magical effects and be able to cast some wizard spells. and they get bonded to their weapon, kind of like a warlock does, and they can just summon their hopefully magic sword to them at any point. I think my character Flint from Ukador was a good illustration of how that could work and work really well.
Absolutely.
Especially if you do the feat that I took at first level as a human, and also took Magic Initiate to get even more spells.
Well, there you have it. The fighter class here on Quests and Answers. Jason Russell, where can everybody find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Critical Dice, on Twitter at Critical_Dice, and I'm playing around with TikTok now, so maybe try that. I don't know. We'll see.
Oh, okay. That's new information.
It is.
And you can find me, Chris Solo, at DM Chris Solo on all the social medias. This is Quests and Answers, where we go on the quest to find the answers. And we'll see you guys next time.